our next presenter joins us from the Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement, also known as CADIA. CADIA is a media and industry partner for the American Automotive Summit. The organization is in the automotive industry. I apologize. To start up or rev up their diversity and inclusion programs in the area of workforce, workplace, and supply chain. This includes women and diverse talent from varied career functions and organizations within automotive who want to move forward in their careers and who are dedicated to supporting the advancement of others along the way. CADIA is on a mission to advance diverse talent and double the number of women leaders in the automotive industry by 2030 using the proven tools of community building, mentorship, and advocacy. Joining us today is CADIA's founder. She has more than 33 years of experience in the automotive industry with more than 30 years at Ford. After Ford, she worked at American Axle and Manufacturing as a global director of Prototype. She now leads CADIA as her full-time mission. Today, her presentation will focus on hitting the gas on diversity and inclusion for competitive advantage. Please welcome to the stage with a warm round of applause, Cheryl Thompson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I always have this fear that my presentation's not going to load or I lost it. It's like a reoccurring nightmare. So happy to see that up there. So diversity and inclusion, interested by show of hands, how many in your companies have a diversity and inclusion program, initiative? Awesome. How about ERGs, employee resource groups? Beautiful, awesome. She talked a little bit about the mission of CADIA. What we are involved with is helping individuals with professional development, and that's women and diverse talent, but also helping leaders evolve their organizations. It's not going to change overnight. This is a journey, as we'll talk about. So that's the two key things that CADIA supports. So what we're going to cover today is three main things. First of all, what are the three critical components of an effective diversity and inclusion strategy? Second, we'll talk about building the business case. How do you make it everybody's job and make it relevant to every single person? And third, how can we get some quick wins and build momentum? So trends in the automotive industry. So we've all heard about Microsoft, Intel, Uber, Adidas, who's the other one? Nike, right? There's been some talk about the lack of diversity and inclusion and how that affects the bottom line and the difference between the employee base, the leadership base, and the consumer base. So as we get out and start talking to companies within automotive, and this is the OEMs and the supply base, some of the things that we're starting to hear is there's external pressure to do something with diversity and inclusion. Now we're also hearing equity and belonging. And so number one, institutional investors. There's a score that they look at, and they look at the risk factor, is the organization sustainable? So they're looking at diversity of boards, they're looking at diversity of leadership teams. Second, we're hearing from some of the clients that we're working with that their boards are demanding more progress in diversity and inclusion. Customers are demanding diversity. Talent, so this is a big thing, especially with millennials and the Gen Zs coming behind. They want to work for a company that not only values diversity, but more importantly, inclusion. And then third, the consumers, the actual people buying the product. And I want to jump back up to the customers for a second. I'm even hearing from some OEMs that they will not source suppliers who do not have a diversity and inclusion strategy or program. So let's talk about the customers, the ones buying the vehicles. There's never been a bigger divide between the customers buying the vehicle and the employee base. And it gets thinner and thinner as you get to the top of the leadership ranks. So women play a lead role in buying automotives. They make 85% of the purchasing decisions. Hispanics account for 35% of new vehicle purchases. And blacks spend $1.2 trillion annually. And they were the demographic most likely to purchase a vehicle in 2018. Workforce diversity, as I mentioned, it thins at the top. So as you probably know, women make up half of the workforce, but in automotive, they only make up 25% of the workforce. And automotive has been named as one of the industries that has the worst retention and attraction rate for women. But gender parity is on the rise in all technical fields because there are more girls going into STEM fields. The key is going to be to retain the women. So the panel before, I think Linda mentioned it at the end, innovation, right? We need different ideas, we need different ways of thinking because technology is changing so fast. I'm sure the last 2 days we spent a lot of time talking and learning about this automotive revolution that's going on. You look at where we started in 1913 with Henry Ford's Model T assembly line and think about the change that's coming and how fast it's coming over the last couple of years, and it's going to continue rapidly expanding at an exponential rate. So autonomous vehicles, the digital transformation, AI, augmented reality, machine learning, additive manufacturing, electrification. We're going to need to have talent that thinks differently, that challenges the status quo, to be able to realize revenues from being more innovative. And our demographic landscape is changing. We are going to need to modernize our talent base. So the millennials in 2016 became the largest generation of the workforce. And in 2020, they're going to be 50% of the workforce. Also in 2020, the US Census Bureau says that 50.2% of the children under 18 are going to come from a minority race or an ethnic group. And I need to update the S&P 500 here. This has improved a little bit this past year, but there were 3 black CEOs, 11 Latino, 12 Asian, 24 women, and the rest were men when you look at the CEOs of the S&P 500. And then when you look at automotive manufacturing, women are underrepresented throughout the entire pipeline. So entry level is about 26% right now. But when you get into director level, it falls to 20%. VP level is 18%. Senior VP is about 16%. And then you go all the way up to the C-suite, and it's only 13%. So it gets thinner and thinner. A little bit about my background. In the introduction, you heard I had some time at Ford and American Axle. My time at Ford, I have a diverse career. I started off in food service. So this is when Ford still had a food service department. My first job was washing dishes in the basement of World Headquarters. And I started there when I was 19. I had gotten pregnant with my son when I was 17, and I was waitressing at the time. So my dad, who was an engineer at Ford, said, hey, why don't you go apply at Ford? Maybe they'll pay for your benefits. Maybe you'll get your education paid for. So started in food service, and they recruited me into their apprenticeship program. So I thought it was going to be an electrician or a pipe fitter. I knew what that was. I thought if I got laid off, because layoffs were common in the late 80s, I could pick up a job. Well, they only had tool and die available. So I became a tool and die maker, thinking I was going to make tools and die them. I had no idea what tool and die was. So I did my 4-year apprenticeship at the Rouge Complex, became a journey person, and through great mentorship and some opportunities, I became an engineer. I kept going to school and became an engineer. So 15 years on the vehicle side, 15 years on the powertrain side. When I retired from Ford, I was leading powertrain prototype, and I had a team of about 500 people. And then I wanted to see what the supplier side was like and a different culture. I think I was in a bubble at Ford Motor Company, so I wanted to see another side of things. So a year and a half at American Axle. And at my time at Ford, during my time in operations and manufacturing engineering, I always had a hand in the people side. So I was the co-chair of the Personnel Development Committee and the Diversity Council. We had one, 15, 20 years ago. So that's my background, a little bit about who I am. So the diversity and inclusion journey, I wanted to spend a little bit of time on this slide because we've heard about diversity and inclusion, we've heard about it for a while. Companies were worrying about this 15, 20 years ago. And there is a little bit of, I guess, bad taste in some people's mouths when this comes up. And I get this question a lot. Like, hey, we've had quotas in the past. There was backlash from that. Some people got put into positions they maybe weren't right for. How do we prevent that whole thing from happening? And so I think the key is realizing that it's a journey. It cannot be solved overnight. It can't be solved with quotas. And I want to take you, this was shared with me on a presentation through Automotive News. There was a webinar. And this slide was shared. And it talks about the different stages. So the first stage is, it is a legal requirement. There's maybe a D&I team, a diversity and inclusion team working on it. And diversity is seen as a problem that has to be managed. There's a lot of resistance to it. People don't understand why we're doing it. There are some questions. Then you get into level 2, where it becomes there's a program. And you've got the HR team involved. You've got the D&I team involved. And the business case is starting to be articulated. People are starting to understand why it's important. You've got some ad hoc strategies. Maybe there's some training that's done, some workshops that are done. And the resistance is starting to slow down. And minorities, employees are starting to adapt or they're leaving. Then the transition point's right in the middle. And this is when it gets really interesting. Leaders are starting to get involved. So now you've got the CEO who says, yes, this is a priority. There's some systemic and cultural behavioral changes that are starting to happen. Leaders are committed. There's a model. The talent systems are starting to be reset, so there's some systemic changes that are going on. And progress is being monitored. So just like any other business initiative, there's some targets put in place, and they're starting to get measured, and there's accountability. And then the last level is integrated. So the entire organization is interested and accountable, and it's embedded in the DNA of the entire organization. So that's the last step. So it's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, and we really have to meet people where they're at. This is another model. There's a book called Inclusion, and it's by Jennifer Brown. And her model talks about the leadership continuum. So we start off unaware, we move to aware, then we move to active, and then advocate. And we're always moving back and forth through this continuum. So where I may be an active or advocate in women's leadership, on other issues, maybe people of color, Asian Americans, LGBTQ, I'm maybe unaware. And I'm learning. So unaware is you don't know what you don't know. Aware is you're starting to be aware, you're starting to notice your own biases, you're starting to call out other people's biases. Then you move to active, and you're actually advocating for somebody. And you're saying, who else could I advocate for, right? You're really starting to make a difference. And then the last is advocate. So now you're really starting to make systemic change. So the important thing to remember here is we never know everything. We're always going to be learning and moving back and forth through the continuum. So in my experience, here are the characteristics that make a successful program. So the first one is experiential learning. We had a great roundtable discussion that Linda, who was on the quality panel before, talked about. She talked about some unconscious bias training that they went through, and they did the privilege walk. Has anyone ever done the privilege walk before? So you stand on a line, and they say, okay, take one step forward if you're born in the United States. Take one step back if your parents came to the US with force. If there's trouble and you don't have any fear of calling the police, take one step forward. So you get to see this whole idea of privilege. And so what she was talking about was that part of the workshop was really, really good, because it involved people. People start to get in their cells and their bones. So the first key to a successful D&I strategy is experiential learning. The PowerPoints and the binders, that's not very effective. Next one is metrics. So you should be looking at what are the key metrics that you want to be measuring and holding people accountable to, just like you would in any other business objective, safety, cost, quality, delivery. Third is difficult conversations. These are not easy things. We were talking about the chivalry, and the women were getting served first on the desserts, and somebody pointed that out. And then somebody else at the table was like, well, that's, they're treating me differently. And we had this whole interesting conversation, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine that was in a wheelchair, and he said, I hate it when people open the door for me, right? I would do that for you, I'm just being nice, right? So it's having these conversations, and they're uncomfortable, they're difficult, but we need to have these conversations. And the last one is quick wins. So what are some things that you can do today to start building some momentum and let people start to see the benefit? So I just wanted to touch on those. I don't have time to go into those in great detail, but what I wanted to spend some time on today is what is the most critical thing. And so here's the 3 critical components. Number 1, champion diverse talent. Number 2, systemic change. And number 3, leadership commitment. So I'm going to go into each one of these in some detail. So you can think about these as the 3 C's: champion, change, and commitment. So first of all, champion diverse talent. What is it and what is it not? You've probably seen this is not thing. It's a tool. So first of all, it is supporting women and diverse talent. It's not about fixing women. I think there's been so many leadership development programs for women, right? We're getting taught to death. It's not a problem to be fixed with women. We've got to look at the whole system. It's not quotas. Quotas are actually illegal, right? It is about setting some targets and being intentional. It's not about promotion without qualification. So it is about opportunity for all. It is about making sure there are role models so that you can see a career path forward. One of my biggest things that had me stuck was I couldn't see anybody that looked like me in leadership. And I thought I was going to have to act like a man or act like somebody that I wasn't in order to be a leader. Professional development. It is about mentoring. Mentorships are very, very important. It is about having a good succession planning process in place within your company. And it is about sponsorship. And sponsorship is a little bit different than mentorship. Mentors, will kind of talk to you and share their advice and their best practices and help you along. But sponsors are somebody who's actually going to talk about you when you're not in the room and put their political capital on the line to open up opportunity for you or to advance you. And it is about setting targets, as I mentioned. So I wanted to put this slide in here to talk a little bit about it's not just women. It's not just about the visible aspects of diversity. There's a lot more to diversity, and there's so much more that we can be getting out of people. There's this whole saying of bring your whole self to work. I'd like to say bring your best self to work. We may be in trouble if people bring their whole selves to work. We've got to be a little bit careful. But these are 2 models that I love. So the first one here, the very colorful one, it's got the internal dimensions on the inside. So you've got age, race, ethnicity, mental, physical ability, sexual orientation, national origin, and gender identity and expression. But on the outside, you've got things that you were born with or maybe you inherited. So education, political belief, family, organizational role, income, religion, appearance, all of that. Then the other model over there, in the center, you start with personality. How many of you have taken DISC or MBTI, Myers-Briggs, right? That's a part of diversity as well. And then they go to the internal and external. Then there's the organizational dimensions of diversity. So are you union a member or not? Are you leadership? What's your seniority? What's your work location? So there's a whole bunch of different diversity aspects to be aware of. It's not just the visible ones that you can see. So I wanted to share a little story about Jack and Jill. So when we talk about champion diverse talent, this is something that you can do wherever you're at. So in the last role that I had 2 young women working for me. So Jack was in my office all the time, looking for opportunity. Hey, what can I do? What can I do? What's your biggest problem? Let me solve your problem. And so I was giving him assignments, and he was getting visibility, People were looking at him, hey, look what Jack can do. Jill, on the other hand, was not coming to me, and she was very frustrated in one of our conversations. And she said, you give Jack all these assignments, I don't get anything. And I really had to check myself. I prided myself at being an advocate for women, and here I've got this woman that I'm not giving any opportunity to. And I had to really think about that. Well, number one, the obvious, she's not in there asking me for the assignments. That's number one. But number two, would I feel comfortable giving her those assignments? And truth is, I wasn't, because she had some development to do. So I really needed to spend some time working with her to get her ready to take on those opportunities. So the quick win that you can all take away is, before we start to look at the way promotions are given, the way talent is assessed, the way we hire and all of that, we've got to look at the way we assign work. And there's a difference between equality and equity. So equality is 50-50, and everybody gets the same piece of pie, or everybody gets the same. It's really about equality and thinking about, how do I make sure that everybody is, on a level playing field here? And so in the case of Jill, it's, what extra time did I need to spend with her? What development did I need to give her to make sure that she was ready, that I could give her those assignments that put her in front of people who could see what she could do? And think about that. If you took your entire team and you handed out assignments equally across the entire team, how much more powerful would you be? How many more things would you be getting done? So that's number one quick win for you. So number two, the C number two, is systemic change. So systemic change is really looking at the way we hire, recruit, interview, how we assess talent. And so I would recommend that it's reviewing your recruitment practices. It is reviewing the way you interview. How do you assess talent when it's performance review time? How are you promoting talent? Look at your attrition. What do your attrition rates look like? And are there any trends there? What kind of complaints are you getting? Pay. Is there equal pay across gender? And do you have unconscious bias training available? So that's what systemic change is. What it is not, it's not reverse discrimination. Again, it's not quotas. And it's not diversity alone, because we can have diversity, you can make sure all your numbers look good, but the people aren't going to stay if you don't have inclusion. So the quick win here that I wanted to talk about is networks. When we think about hiring or promoting, you hire people because you're comfortable with them. You promote people because, well, number one, you like them, you're comfortable with them. So we tend to end up with people who all look like us in our networks. And I'll give you a very good example. Like I said, we're all learning here, including me. I look at my organization right now, CADIA, the Center for Automotive Diversity, Inclusion, and Advancement. And right now, we're 3 white women. So I need to start looking at the next hire we make. I've got to start looking outside of my network. So quick win for you all to take away. Don't just assume that because women or minorities groups don't apply for a position, that there aren't qualified candidates out there. And I hear this all the time, the pipeline, there's no pipeline, there's no pipeline. I have found through my work there is a pipeline, they're out there. You just have to make an effort. So a lot of you raised your hands that you had employee resource groups. Start to leverage your employee resource groups to look for talent. And then here's some other ideas on how to go outside and spend the effort and be intentional. So professional associations, at our lunchtime roundtable, we talked about a conference that comes to Detroit every year called the Women of Color. Go to one of those conferences and set up a booth. Trade magazines, colleges or universities that are historically black, job fairs, local churches, veteran affairs, local military bases, getting involved in local community issues as a volunteer or sponsor, posting openings in different publications, social media, and then diversity-specific job sites. And I put a couple here that I checked them out ahead of time, and they're really good. One is employeediversity.com, and the other is diversityfirstjobs.com. And the third leg here for the third C is leadership commitment. I think the quality team, Sasha, is it Sasha? You made that comment, right? It starts at the top. You've got to have leadership commitment. So it is senior leadership led. You've got to have commitment from the executive team. And you've got to share the why. People have to understand why you're doing it, and it's really good if it's all embedded into your mission, vision, and values so everybody knows. It's got to be top down and bottom up. And expected behavior should be communicated, and they should be modeled. Like we've all sat in these town halls where something is communicated, and then the behavior doesn't reflect what was talked about. It's got to be lived and breathed. And it is a multi-year journey. This is not something that you're going to do overnight, and that's why our initiative, Double the Number of Women and Diverse Leaders by 2030, is in place. We know it's going to take a long time. It's a journey. And it's an investment of time, resources, and budget. This is not just something that you can attach onto somebody who already has a full-time job. There's got to be resource commitment there. It's not training without culture. So if you do unconscious bias training, and that's all you do, you run the risk of embittering some people. So now you've raised everybody's awareness to it, and then you're not following up with the expected behaviors, and there's going to be a negative consequence to that. It's not just bottom up. It's got to come from the top. And it's not one person or department's job. So quick win for y'all on this one. Make it personal. So think about the different functional areas. The CEO, the executive leadership at the top, they're going to have their why, and they should be communicating that. But for every different functional area, what's in it for them? So I just have a few examples here, but on the legal side, right, they're looking at compliance and risk and the EOC requirements. Talent acquisition. What's important to them is attracting talent, developing talent, and retaining talent. The CEO and the C-suite, they're going to be concerned with sustainability and corporate responsibility, profitability. Finance team, they're going to be looking at the investors and what are the investors interested in. Marketing and communications, think about the customer base and who the sales team is in front of. And that sales team or other customer-facing roles ought to be diverse and representative of the people they're talking to. And then functional area leaders, like probably most of us in this room, productivity. You know, I talked about giving equal opportunity to everybody on your entire team. You're going to be more productive when you're more inclusive. Having people more engaged, more innovation, better decision making. There was a study done about diversity on boards, and they found that when there were more women on boards, and this came from the quotas in Norway, where they were forced to put more women on boards, the decision making became better. It was slower, but it was actually better, and more creativity. So you could start looking at the ROI, and I have a couple of examples here. So obviously, it's the cost of the benefit divided by the investment. So a couple of examples. If you had a women's leadership program and a woman walked away with the ability to negotiate better, maybe the women's leadership program cost $5,000 for that individual, and she was able to save $50,000 on negotiating a deal, that's an ROI of over 1,000%. Look at awarded business. So you hired a diverse sales team member. Maybe that cost you $200,000. And you won a big deal, a $50 million deal. So that could contribute to an ROI of over 25,000%. Maybe extreme, but that, you need to go into your own area and think about what's in it for you personally. And I heard the quality team talk about this. Make it clear that diversity and inclusion is everybody's responsibility. It's not just one department's job or not one person's job. Just like we've learned to look at safety and quality throughout the years in manufacturing and automotive, it's everybody's job. So why does diversity and inclusion matter? I think I talked a lot about this. What are the benefits? So I'm not going into each one of these, and I won't read all the bullet points you can read. But talent, that's one of the pillars. So attracting talent, retaining talent, maximizing productivity, and increased job satisfaction and knowledge sharing. Second pillar is innovation and performance. So increased revenues with more innovative products and services. Diversity reduces groupthink, and it's key to team performance. Third pillar is reputation and responsibility. So mixed gender boards have less instances of fraud. They're more likely to call each other out and recognize risk factors. And boardroom diversity strengthens corporate social responsibility and performance. And then financial performance is the last pillar here. And companies can actually pay a penalty for lack of diversity. As I mentioned earlier, there's some OEMs, and I've heard this from the OEM side and I've heard it from the supplier side, where they're not getting business because they don't have a diversity and inclusion program. This is a compilation of a lot of different studies that are out there, and the sources are below. But there's 8 times return on every dollar spent on diversity and inclusion. Companies are 8 times more likely to achieve better business outcomes. They're 35% more likely to outperform their less diverse competitors, 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile, 3 times more likely to retain millennials for more than 5 years. And there's a 7% market capitalization decline for companies with public incidents of racist and sexist behavior. And the last one, there's a 1% revenue increase for every 10% toward 50-50 gender parity. So I'll leave you with this. I believe one of the most important things for diversity and inclusion is inclusion. And this is the last team that I led. And I look at the change in that team once I started looking at every single person as an individual and what is each individual superpower and what do they bring to the table and how we were better able to solve problems and fill gaps. So I believe inclusive leadership gives us the power of full engagement. So that's all I have. Any questions? Yes.
You mentioned Kadia's goal, but what are some of the things that you do to work with companies to try to attain that goal, or maybe services or things that you do throughout the year?
Yeah, so right now we have a membership for individuals and corporations. So there's professional development for women and diverse talent. So we're looking at ways to set them up for success in their careers. So we're looking at things like leadership mindset. What is the right way to position yourself for advancement? So what are the right assignments to take on? And how to be a good high performer and high success, and then work-life integration. And so that's on the individual side. We're starting to add things for the next generation leaders, so millennials. And what do the millennials need to lead, right? They're ready to lead. They want us all to get out of the way so that they can lead. However, they're going to need to lead in their own way, and they're going to need to leverage the experience of those that came before them. And then the last thing is the established leader. So how do you be an innovative leader? And then we're starting to work with executive teams on where are you? Like, start from where you're at and helping them build we're calling it a Rev Up roadmap. Thank you. Anyone else? Everyone's got it all figured out? All right. Thank you very much.